Parrot TV, the voice for humanity.
Hello and welcome to the New York Parrot Literary Corner. I am Dustin Pickering, your anchor and host. Today we have Richard Modiano, who is a native of Los Angeles. He attended the University of Hawaii and New York University. While a resident of New York City, he became active in the literary community connected to the Poetry Project, where he came to know Gregory Corso, Allen Ginsberg, Anne Waldman, William S. Burroughs, and Ted Berrigan. From 2010 to 2019, he was executive director of Beyond Baroque Literary and Arts Center. In that time, he produced and curated hundreds of literary events. Richard is a rank and file member of the Industrial Workers of the World, and in 2019, he was elected vice president of the California State Poetry Society. Thanks for joining us today, Richard. How are you?
Good. Thank you for having me, Dustin.
Quite welcome. So if there's anything interesting about yourself you want to say to the viewers ahead of the show at the beginning here to kind of kick us off, it's not in your bio, anything you want to talk about yourself?
Well, not really, other than I've been trying to make the best of my time during lockdown, which I trust will be ending sometime this year.
I hope so.
Some say here in California, the governor said middle of June, maybe more realistically, it might be in autumn, but who knows?
That's great. I'm hoping so. They've already relieved the mask orders, I believe, in Texas, which may not have been the best plan, but our governor is not really the most apt mind in many ways. So back to the poetry. What was your first experience with poetry? How did it make you feel when you first wrote your first poem?
Well, my first experience with poetry, I suppose, like a lot of people living in the US, going to school, we probably read in maybe the 7th grade Walt Whitman, Edgar Allan Poe. So that was my absolute first experience with poetry that was handed to me. The poetry that I sought out, though, was the poetry that I encountered in underground newspapers in the 1960s, starting with Allen Ginsberg. And from Ginsberg, I went on to read other poets who were of the Beat generation, and the people that came before them that you might say were in that lineage. People like William Carlos Williams, May Sarton, Hilda Doolittle, Ezra Pound, and so on. And when I came to write poetry, I wanted to write poetry that could be understood and that was in a heightened language. Basically, I wanted to write poetry that was sort of carved from demotic speech, the speech that is part of everyday life, but was not simply a reproduction of it, but was a selection of what was vivid in it.
It's an interesting aesthetic. It's sort of a kind of combination of high and low society, I guess you could say, like elevating language a little bit, but yet being understandable to the average reader. Yeah. So how did you first become active in the Poetry Project in New York City? What was your experience there?
Well, I knew of the Poetry Project, and when I was going to NYU starting in 1974, I went to some readings at the Poetry Project, and they also had workshops there, and it was a sort of poetry central for these modernist poets of the New York school, like Anne Waldman and Ted Berrigan, and poets like Allen Ginsberg, and then William Burroughs returned to the United States in 1974. And of course, Gregory Corso was part of the Lower East Side scene as well. And that is how I basically connected to those people. And of course, they were all pretty well, although they're now in some respects legendary, at that time, they were perfectly approachable. Excuse me, little cat.
Love to get
they were encouraging to anybody who took a real interest in literature and poetry.
Right. And that very open, so it was a very open environment and
Yes.
inviting to anybody who was interested. Was poetry something popular at the time? Did it spark a lot of minds, or was it sort of like today? It's not as really. It's sort of like almost an underground activity in a lot of ways.
Well, it was because of its geographical location on the Lower East Side, which was a sort of center of underground culture at that time, including the burgeoning punk rock scene at CBGB's and the Mud Club. La Mama Theater was there. There was a lot of street theater. There was a lot of what we now call do-it-yourself art happening at that time. Storefront bookstores that lasted maybe a few months and then closed for one reason or another. Little theaters that existed in storefronts. A whole bunch of stuff like that was happening then. And it was all perfectly accessible. There were plenty of meeting places, and art was happening all the time, 7 days a week, almost 24/7.
So were you involved in the punk scene at all, or any of the other underground activities there?
Well, I was mostly involved, to the extent that I was involved in the punk scene, it was as an audience member. When I was going to NYU, the film director, Nicholas Ray, was teaching there. And Nicholas Ray, of course, famously made Rebel Without a Cause. And he had a coterie of followers. And one of them was a guy that I knew who liked to wear a red windbreaker like James Dean wore in Rebel Without a Cause. And this guy took me to the Mud Club.
Mm-hmm.
And that I think we saw the New York Dolls.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my entree into that. And also the other interesting thing about the Lower East Side at that time was there was a building called 339 Lafayette Street. And in this building, the headquarters of the War Resisters League, the Congress of Racial Equality, and the Socialist Party of America were lodged.
Hmm.
So there was a sort of a traditional, these were all old, venerable organizations in the US that appeared much earlier than SDS or the Weathermen or anything of that sort. So there was this long connection to traditional American radicalism. And I joined the IWW, which was then their offices were at 119 East 10th Street, which was just down the block from the Poetry Project. And there was a tremendous sort of overlap between the arts and this kind of grassroots radicalism. It's quite different than your usual stodgy, bureaucratic Communist Party or Communist Labor Party or Revolutionary Communist Party, grayness and blandness. So it had these connections, and particularly the IWW, of course, had a long tradition of street poetry through people like T-Bone Slim, folk singers like Joe Hill, who was a big influence later on Pete Seeger and Woody Guthrie, and down to even Tom Morello. So
Mm-hmm.
there is this connection to the arts, and without that art connection, I don't think I would have had as much of an interest in radical politics as I finally did.
So where did other than being involved in the IWW and in that relation to poetry and the arts, how else does activism? How else did you get involved in activism and how does that draw into your poetic work?
Well, at that time, the Vietnam War was winding down, soon to come to a conclusion in 1975. And there was a big celebration of the end of the war in Central Park in 1975 that had Allen Ginsberg was part of that. Let's see, a couple of other celebrities were part of that. Phil Oakes was there. He was a good friend of the IWW, although he wasn't a wobbly. So all of that sort of joy and creativity was sort of unlocked by that. And there was also, at the same time, Other movements were emerging. For example, in 1969, I believe it was 69 or 68, there were the Stonewall riots and the beginnings of gay liberation. And that was also feeding into it because, there were many artists who were in the context of the underground, you could be out. Above ground, it was still illegal to some extent.
Mhm.
But after that, people were coming forth and they were making art about uh, their experiences as LGBTQ people, and of course there was also the tremendous vitality of Black liberation that was going on then. There were poets like Amiri Baraka, Ted Jones, Jane Cortez. This was all happening at that time, so it was all feeding into that.
Wow. A lot of history going on at that time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and how does I was reading a little bit of your some of your essays online, and you wrote on an essay on surrealism. Does that still factor into your work and in your
Oh yes,
interests?
yes, I like surrealism. Yes.
So can you kind of explain, I guess in layman's terms, what surrealism is for those who aren't familiar, that's familiar with the movement?
Well, it emerged after World War One. It had a predecessor in Dada, which is still vital down to the present. Publisher in New York, called Three Rooms Press, publishes a Dada annual called Maintenant, and their 15th issue is coming out this year. But the Surrealists had this sense of play, and they incorporated dream and totally unfettered imagination. And they tried to combine art and life into one. So their art was their life was their art. This was also an aspect of the Beat Generation too, although the aesthetic is not the same, but the underlying combination of my life is my art is my life was part of that. And that goes for punk too. So it was both an art, a lifestyle, a way of being in the world. And with the Surrealists, they in their history they actually formally all at once joined the French Communist Party, and then half of them left it because of Stalin. But they remained committed to this radical politics and to the sort of transformation of the imagination. And basically, it's sort of unlocking your imagination and bringing your dream world into reality and living out your dreams. They had all kinds of surrealist games. They analyzed their dreams. They met in groups. And of course, there was the famous group poem called The Exquisite Corpse, where one person wrote a line and folded it over, and then another person wrote a line and it was passed around. And then the whole thing was unfolded and read. So, and that was the poem, a sort of a group poem
Hmm.
of all of these different lines that were juxtaposed. So, of course, most people today, the popular thing with surrealism, when they say that was surreal, that means it was weird or freaky or something like that. But surrealism, they claim among their antecedents people like Edgar Allan Poe, Lautréamont, Jacques Vache, um, going back even earlier. Shelley doesn't seem like a surrealist, but the way that he made the way that he made his life the object of his poetry, and his concerns the subject of his poetry, that also fed into that.
Hmm.
And of course, it started with poetry, but it expanded into the visual arts. So there are surrealist painters, collagists, filmmakers, even theater pieces, and certain artists that we know of did their time in surrealism, like Picasso, for example. He had a surrealist period.
Right. So how does surrealism influence your own attitudes and beliefs about creativity and poetry?
Well, I think that if you can imagine it, you can put it into your poetry. If you can dream it, your dream can that dream can be turned into poetry. And it's basically sort of opening up and letting all of these ideas flow together. I mean, uh, when I write a surrealist poem, I haven't, I put an object in front of the subject that I want to write about, and I free associate off of it. And I save all of the good images that are vivid and striking.
Hmm.
So,
Interesting. So would you like to share a poem with us?
sure, since we were talking about that,
Mhm.
let me find this. This is,
You're watching the New York Parrot Literary Corner, and I'm Dustin Pickering. We have Richard Modiano with us today. And happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there.
This is called Poem for Zoe Tamerlis. Zoe Tamerlis was a denizen of the Lower East Side. She was an actress. Her most famous role is in Ms. 45, but she was part of anarchist circles on the Lower East Side. So, Poem for Zoe Tamerlis. Cats leap across my heart when I see your full red lips, and the glassy water breaks with white sparks, scattering your words in all directions. Zoe, your crowned scalp with inky black hair, a halo of dawn over the urban river's skylight. Tonight, you see through my words, Zoe of twilight ruby, and I sleep through your breath, Zoe of black leather. I dream through your tattooed arms, Zoe of a desert where the hawks turn blue, and I walk in your palm of Mount Nauru. Zoe of obsidian in the coup d'etat, and I'm lost in your solar breasts, the flares made fertile. Zoe in the night of honeysuckle, Zoe of crystal palace, Zoe of Mongolian steppes covered with gold Krugerrands, Zoe of boots under a red brick tenement where anarchists are plotting our liberation, Zoe of dolphin spume, Zoe of llama made helium, Zoe.
So, definitely very surreal images there.
Yeah.
Excellent. And the cat sleeping into your heart. And speaking of cats again.
Mm-hmm.
So you're no longer director at the Beyond Baroque Foundation, but what kind of work did you do with that, with the foundation? And what is it?
Mm-hmm. Well, when I came onto it, Beyond Baroque, it was in decline at that point. A lot of donors had disappeared, and its reputation in the poetry community had receded. Membership had receded, and my first challenge was to revive Beyond Baroque, both financially and repair its reputation, and make it friendly to the community once again. And after my first 10 months, we succeeded in all of that. I had the support of people like Sherman Pearl, who was the president of the board at that point. And the idea was to make it a place that was a community place, a horizontal community place, not a hierarchical one, but to open it to as many people as possible who wanted to practice their art there or share their art there. There was at the time, there was one poetry workshop. We expanded this into other workshops. The famous Wednesday night poetry workshop had been going on for years, and a lot of people came through that workshop over the decades. People that became famous in other areas, for example, Exene Cervenka and John Doe were part of that workshop. The actor Viggo Mortensen was part of that workshop. One of the most famous. It had a lot of remarkable facilitators over the course of its existence, and who turned on a lot of people to poetry. So we basically, during my tenure, opened it up to as many people as I could. It was not always well received because there are, within the poetry world, there are aesthetic hierarchies, so to speak. And some people said, well, this place shouldn't be open. This is not an amateur night performance place. But you have to, you take a certain risk, you take a certain chance in providing a platform for people. They may succeed, they may fail, but to me, it was worth giving them a chance. So I wanted it to be sort of the People's Poetry Center.
Excellent. And I think that it's a great aesthetic. It's wonderful to open up avenues for people, even if they're, trying to make it more democratic in that sense and bottom up rather than, try to do a very rigid structure where we're like elitist, something of that nature. So are you still working with the Moon and Sun Review?
Yes, it's published occasionally. My inspiration was a periodical called Shig's Review, and that refers to a man named Shig Morale, who was the manager of City Lights bookstore and was actually the co-owner of it, although, Lawrence Ferlinghetti, who passed earlier this year, was known as sort of the public face of City Lights. But if you went in there during the time when Shig was manager, he was the guy that you saw, and he was responsible for the day-to-day operations of the bookstore. And he published an occasional periodical called Shig's Review. And basically it was whatever he wanted to publish. And I before lockdown went in, I had prepared a special issue devoted to Gregory Corso.
Hmm.
And last year would have been Corso's 90th birthday. We were going to have an event at Beyond Baroque about centering around Gregory Corso, reading from his works, and I was going to distribute the magazine at that reading, but because of the pandemic, it was canceled. So that was the last issue, and I am actually still, I haven't printed it up yet. I have all of the contributions, including new unpublished Corso, well, not new material, but unpublished Corso material that I hope to get out and distributed shortly.
Sounds interesting. What kind of material do you look for as an editor?
Well, I look for, I basically look for whatever suits my fancy. So generally speaking, I publish old obscure material that has not been seen widely, or material that is written a long time ago that just hasn't been published. For example, for the anniversary of the Spanish Revolution of 1936, I published a special issue, and I found some really obscure material that had not been published. I found Ernest Hemingway's speech delivered at a commemoration of the Abraham Lincoln Battalion that hadn't been published, so that was part of the issue. I found a letter that was written by B. Traven, the author of The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, about the Spanish Revolution that also had not seen the light of day. I published that. I published new material by people who had an interest in the Spanish Revolution. So, it was basically that old and new for that particular issue. For other issues, I have a lot of poet friends, and I let them know I'm publishing a new issue. Anything you want to put in, send it to me. And when I have enough material, I say, okay, I've got enough for an issue, and then I put it out.
Excellent. So would you like to share another poem with us?
Sure. This is called a poem for Dennis Cruz. Dennis Cruz is a wonderful Los Angeles poet. His last book, which was published by Punk Hostage Press, was called The Beast Is We. And I was invited by the publisher, Iris Berry, to write an introduction for that fantastic volume, and it inspired a poem. So I'm trying to keep my cat from walking in front of the camera while I'm doing this. So please bear with me. Please bear with me.
Okay.
Poem for Dennis Cruz. I saw a black tarantula crawling out from under the flower pots. Have you ever seen one? They are not spiders. They are black and furry and beautiful, because when ugliness and wickedness are as deep as experience, when they come down from eternity, they have a perfection of their own. I watched this beast and I said to myself, how beautiful you can be with your long strangler's paws, your fine corset of dusky velvet, your furry belly, your fabulous jaws. It was when a big drop of poison fell. That's how you were born, and you live because you are perfect. But I'm going to take my revenge on you, filthy insect. I have known too many victims, and I have a debt to pay. Now she's sorry.
It's okay. Cats.
Sorry, little cat. But I'm going to take my revenge on you, filthy insect. I've known too many victims, and I have a debt to pay. And just imagine, the tarantula understood me. He was paralyzed, befuddled by his destiny. He looked around stupidly for a way out, but for him, there was no way. My eyes hypnotized him. I was so sure that he wouldn't go away that I went into the kitchen for the hammer. It gave me pleasure to swing the hammer on that black beast, and I laughed as though I had one drink too many. I crushed the velvet tarantula with one blow, crack. Sorry, little cat, please don't. That's what you've got to do from time to time in this world, or the air would be unbreathable.
You know, reading and hearing that, thing I think of is there's a section in Nietzsche's The Spake Zarathustra where he has a section called On Tarantulas. I think it has a very similar feel about it, because he talks about, you know, not sticking your hand in a hole where, you know, where the tarantula would be. It's kind of interesting. You know, and reading your other work online, I came across a short essay called First Thought, Best Thought.
Oh, yes.
And there's a quote from that that I pulled that I found fascinating, and I was going to read it and see if you could elaborate on it. It goes like this: the skill comes in finding the right words to embody that thought in its naked immediacy, and this may involve rewriting. So what do you have to say to elaborate on that? Maybe give us a little bit about that essay and its inspiration as well.
Well, that was First Thought, Best Thought was a phrase that a Tibetan Buddhist teacher named Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche came up with, and his student was Allen Ginsberg, who applied that to poetry. And the idea with First Thought, Best Thought, and if I to parenthetically say here, in this particular tradition, or basically really in all Buddhist tradition, a thought is not merely a string of sub-vocalizations, but a thought can be an image, it can be an auditory, an imaginary recollection of an auditory piece of music, it can be a vision. Those are all considered thoughts. So they're not necessarily words that you think in your mind. All of those are considered thoughts. And in fact, emotions are considered the highlights of thoughts in this tradition. So the idea here is, when you are moved by something, it could be something that is quite personal to you, or it could be something that moves everybody. For something that moves everybody, like, for example, when the assassination of John F. Kennedy was broadcast, everybody was moved by that. But when you get a phone call that your brother has died, that moves just you. That is personal to you. But that your immediate response to that, which carries a weight of emotion, is something that you want to share with other people. So you take that first thought and you write it down, and you figure out a way of making it communicable to other people, so that they too, everybody has lost a loved one. It doesn't have to be my brother that I'm writing about. I'm inspired by this because it is my brother who has died, and I am feeling this because he is the one that has died, because we grew up together, and because I loved him, and I feel this loss. Other people have loss as well. So this can be a balm to other people who've experienced loss. By sharing my loss with them, they find out they are not alone in the world. So I find the language to communicate that to them. And I don't try and when we say first thought, it's not, I'm not trying to soften the blow of grief. I'm not trying to make it palatable. I'm trying to present it in its immediacy, so that they get that impact as well. It recalls that grief that they have experienced. And they have a way of saying, I have experienced this. This guy has experienced this. I am not alone.
Mm-hmm. And in that essay, we have a remaining, 5 or 6 minutes left. So hopefully you'll be able to answer this pretty quick. In the essay, you also mentioned the practice Shunata, which is emptiness. And I wonder what you thought of that in relation to poetry, and what does this practice say about the human spiritual nature?
Well, shunyata is it's a Sanskrit term and is usually translated as emptiness, which means that uh, there is no self nature. There is no the way the classic way of describing it is everything comes together to make whatever phenomena you see. So, for example, a wheel is made up of a rim, spokes, and a hub. And all of those things come together to make a wheel. If you take away the rim, it's not a wheel. If you take away the spokes, it's not a wheel. If you take away the hub, it's not a wheel. It has to have all of those things come together. Therefore, it is empty of self nature. It doesn't mean that it is non-existent or that it's a hallucination, but you have to have this, all of these elements have to come together in order to produce any particular phenomena. So in terms of, of poetry, you bring in all of these elements together to make a poem. The poem does not exist apart from the things that come together to make it. The guy that writes it, the words that they choose, the language that they have in their background that they are familiar with, all of these things come together and make a poem. And that is why you could say that the poem is empty because it does not exist in and of itself. It does not exist in some realm of Platonic ideals where you can just pluck it out and say, here's the poem.
Right.
That's the idea behind that.
So do you think this practice and this idea, does it have anything that it can say about our spiritual nature?
Our spiritual nature, well, it's hard to say. I mean, people have different ways of talking about spirit that are that are basically the religious traditions that we know about. So, you know, in the West, the dominant religions are Christianity and Judaism,
Mm.
and people who there are poets that draw on those traditions to talk about their spiritual experiences. Of course, now we live in a global world where, you know, we can know where virtually, at least in the United States and probably the West, virtually all religions are present here. And you can find followers from all of these different religions, so that there is now a currency, or by currency, I mean a language that at least some of the population can understand when you express yourself within any of these particular traditions. And you can make hybrids of those traditions. Jack Kerouac, for example, was a Roman Catholic, but he informed his Catholicism with Buddhism.
Mhm.
And Allen Ginsberg informed his Judaism with Buddhism, and so on. So there is that sort of spirituality that, and even an atheist has their own particular spiritual values, doesn't believe in gods or a god or the Buddha or anything that the Buddha said or anything that is part of any particular religion at all. But nonetheless, they have spiritual values. They have values that are intangible. And in that respect, you could say those intangible values are their spirit. Those are the things that that make up the spirit for them.
Excellent answer. I think that has a lot of meaning and depth that you've expressed there. So with the remaining, 4 minutes or so, if you would like to leave some words of wisdom for our listeners as well as future artists, and maybe give a few shout outs to friends, family, a cat. Anybody that it means something to you, or somebody that you want to say it's been an inspiration, and thank them as well, if you want to do that.
Well, I recently there are some people that that I'm very grateful to. I'm finishing a book, a collection of poetry and prose, and I had a wonderful editor, S.A. Griffin, who is a poet in and of his own right, a wonderful poet, and also a publisher. And I would like to shout out to my publisher, Iris Berry, who has a publishing house called Punk Hostage Press. They publish voices from the margins, so to speak. and Voices from the Center. And it's a wonderful press. Poetry comrades like Mark Olmsted, inspirations like Anne Waldman, uh, poets who are younger than I and who keep me hopeful about poetry in all of its forms. People like Rich Ferguson, Rick Lupert, um, Puma Pearl, a contemporary, Jack Henry, who publishes a wonderful zine called Heroin Love Songs. All of these people are making poetry. Another guy, Mike Zone, is out there, another publisher poet. All of these people are the people that John Dorsey, I mean, I could go on and on. There are so many great poets who have been part of my life and who continue to inspire me. So that is my shout out to those folks.
Well, thank you for joining us today, Richard. It's been a lovely discussion. I think our viewers have learned quite a bit and understanding poetry as well as the history of American counterculture. We a little bit about that, the IWW. Some of the people may not be familiar with them. So thank you for joining us today. It was a wonderful discussion.
Well, thank you for having me, Dustin.
Quite welcome. This is the New York Parrot Literary Corner, and I'm Dustin Pickering. If you have some spare money to donate, anybody out there, please feel free to send it through PayPal, paypal.me/nyparrot. And we're doing the 1 million subscriber channel to our channel. So please try to subscribe if you're out there viewing and you have not already. Subscribe, like our videos. Please feel free to leave comments. Tell us what you think. Where can we improve? Where can we, any suggestions? Anybody out there, keep watching. And please feel free, if you want a platform, if you're a poet, a writer, an artist, a musician, you want to talk about your art, we're here for you. We're a platform, universal platform. Anybody can contact us and get in touch. So thank you again, Richard, and thank you to our viewers.
Thank you.